I remember the moment the call came. It was late, the kind of cold February night in Akron, Ohio that makes your bones ache just listening to the wind. My mother's voice was quiet on the phone. "It's your father. He's gone." I froze. I was Clara Mitchell, 25 years old, living in a small apartment downtown. My father, George Mitchell, had always been a quiet man, disciplined, respected, and, as I'd just learned, mortal. He had never been sick, never complained, never left me a warning about what was coming. I left work immediately, my mind spinning with disbelief, guilt, and fear. When I arrived at the hospital, the emptiness of the halls made my heart pound. Nurses gave me sympathetic glances, but no one could prepare me for the shock that awaited. My father's body was gone from the room I had last seen him alive in, now replaced with the cold antiseptic smell of a sterile hospital. I called my older brother, Dylan, hoping for some guidance, but he didn't answer. That should have been my first warning. The funeral was held 3 days later. The church was packed with relatives, neighbors, and a few of my father's closest clients. Everyone murmured about what a great man he had been. Everyone except me seemed to feel a strange ease about his passing, a relief that I couldn't understand. I stood quietly beside my mother, listening as Dylan delivered a perfectly rehearsed eulogy that praised Dad's wisdom and generosity. Every word felt hollow, almost rehearsed, until the will was read. I didn't think the lawyer would bring it up that day, but he did. According to George Mitchell's final will, my chest tightened. I clutched my purse so hard my knuckles turned white. And to Clara Mitchell, a personal letter. A letter? That's all I was getting? Nothing else? The room seemed to tilt. My brother didn't even glance at me. My mother's eyes were wet, but her lips stayed pressed together as if afraid words might escape. The lawyer handed me a thin envelope. My name was written on it in Dad's careful, neat handwriting. I felt my hands trembling. Outside, after the ceremony, Dylan finally spoke. "You'll understand," he said casually. "Understand what?" I asked, my voice breaking. He shrugged. "Dad always said you didn't need money the way I did." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why every sacrifice I had made, working after school, helping him manage the office, handling clients without pay, didn't matter. Instead, I went home. I opened the letter in my apartment that night, alone. "Clara, you are strong. You are capable. You don't need what Dylan will need. I trust you'll understand. Dad." I read it again and again. I understood nothing. I understood that my father had made a choice, a deliberate choice, a choice that left me out. I spent the next few days staring at the walls of my apartment. Every memory I had of helping him, supporting the family, staying loyal, felt invisible. The furniture in my small space became a cage I couldn't escape. And then I started noticing things I hadn't seen before. The way Dylan had visited Dad more often, the way he had received praise and attention for minor accomplishments, the way every decision seemed to favor him. I realized that my father's death hadn't just left me grieving, it had exposed a family truth I wasn't ready to face. I wasn't enough. After the funeral, I stayed away from Dylan and Mom as much as I could. My apartment became my sanctuary, though the walls didn't block the memory of Dad, nor the ache of being left out. I tried to focus on work, but everything reminded me of what I had lost. Every phone call from old clients, every unpaid invoice I had once managed for Dad, every small piece of the business I had poured myself into reminded me that Dylan now had what should have been mine. It wasn't just the money, it was everything. The life I had built alongside my father, the trust, the knowledge, the years of work. And now it was gone. One evening, while sorting through old papers in the office Dad had left me access to, I found a folder I had never noticed before. It was tucked behind the ledger books, a thin manila folder with private written in Dad's handwriting. Inside were documents that made my stomach drop. Bank statements, business agreements, signed checks transferring substantial sums of money to Dylan over the past 3 years. I sat at my desk, hands trembling. This wasn't just inheritance. Dylan had been benefiting from Dad long before his death, quietly, systematically, without my knowledge. And then I saw it. A set of emails printed and highlighted. Dylan had requested money transfers under the guise of business needs, investment risks, and even family emergency. Dad had signed every single one without telling me. It was a slow, sickening realization. Dylan hadn't just inherited, he had been prepared to inherit, at my expense. The betrayal hit deeper than money. It was the trust that had been shattered. Dad had trusted Dylan's word over mine. Mom had done nothing to intervene. And here I was, left with a letter that felt like an insult instead of an inheritance. The next day, I confronted Dylan. I went to the family house, the one that was now his. He answered the door, looking surprised. I slammed the folder on the kitchen table. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it carried a weight I had never used before. Dylan picked up a few papers, scanning them. Then he shrugged. "Business stuff, Clara. Dad wanted it done. Nothing for you to worry about." "Nothing for me to worry about," I repeated, louder now. "You've been taking from Dad for years. You let him drain accounts, spend money on your Chicago failures, and you think this is fine?" His expression hardened. "You always overthink everything. Dad trusted me. I handled it." "You handled it at my expense," I said. "I worked for him, supported this family, ran the business when he was too tired, and now you have everything. I got nothing." He leaned back, calm, confident, the same confidence he had always worn like armor. "You're strong. You don't need it. Dad believed that." I froze. The words echoed. My father's letter, his will, everything he had left me wrapped in a compliment, a lie, a justification. "You trusted him over me," I whispered. "You all did." Dylan didn't answer. He never did. I left the house that night, heart pounding, stomach aching. The betrayal wasn't just in the money. It was in the silence, the choice to leave me out, to believe that I would understand without ever giving me a chance to fight for what was mine. I realized that night something terrifying. The life I thought I had wasn't real. I had been a placeholder. My brother had always been the favored one. My father had always prioritized him. And now, with Dad gone, the truth was laid bare. For weeks, I wrestled with anger, grief, and disbelief. I avoided calls. I ignored messages. I couldn't even look at Mom without seeing the quiet complicity in her eyes. And then, one night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit and watch Dylan fail or succeed while I remained invisible. I had knowledge, skill, and drive. I had worked for years in the very business Dylan now controlled. He had no idea what he was dealing with. I could rebuild. I would start over, from nothing if I had to, but I would succeed. And when the time came, Dylan would realize that leaving me out was the biggest mistake he had ever made. Leaving the house that night felt like leaving a life I had built with my own hands, and being told it never belonged to me. But grief, anger, and betrayal have a strange effect. They either break you or they ignite you. I chose the latter. I moved into a small studio apartment in downtown Akron, away from the memories of Dad's house and the business Dylan now controlled. It wasn't much, a bed, a desk, and a kitchenette, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: control. I had spent so many years supporting the family business, managing invoices, handling clients, negotiating contracts, all unpaid labor. Now, that knowledge became my greatest weapon. I reached out quietly to former clients, those who had trusted me long before Dylan's inheritance. I didn't mention family drama. I didn't need to. I simply said, "I can help you. If you're interested, we can meet." They said yes. One by one, small contracts came in. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I started building something new, something clean, something mine. Leaving the house that night felt like leaving a life I had built with my own hands, and being told it never belonged to me. But grief, anger, and betrayal have a strange effect. They either break you or they ignite you. I chose the latter. I moved into a small studio apartment in downtown Akron, away from the memories of Dad's house and the business Dylan now controlled. It wasn't much, a bed, a desk, and a kitchenette, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: control. I had spent so many years supporting the family business, managing invoices, handling clients, negotiating contracts, all unpaid labor. Now, that knowledge became my greatest weapon. I reached out quietly to former clients, those who had trusted me long before Dylan's inheritance. I didn't mention family drama. I didn't need to. I simply said, "I can help you. If you're interested, we can meet." They said yes. One by one, small contracts came in. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I started building something new, something clean, something mine. It wasn't easy. There were long nights filled with fear and self-doubt. There were times I wondered if I would ever be able to escape the shadow of my brother and the will that had left me out. But with each client, each signed contract, each small success, I felt my confidence return. 6 months later, I registered my own consulting firm, Mitchell Solutions. Small, ethical, precise. No family name in the signage, just mine. Meanwhile, Dylan struggled. I heard through the grapevine that he had overextended the business, missed deadlines, and alienated clients. The very people who once relied on him started calling me instead. His confident smile faded. One afternoon, I received an email from Dylan. Subject line: "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part wanted to confront him, to see the guilt in his eyes. I replied, "Sure. Where?" We met at a small cafe halfway between our worlds. He looked tired, defeated. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with unease. I didn't realize how much you did," he admitted. "Dad leaned on you more than I knew. I thought taking over would be easier." I stayed silent. I let him speak. "You've built something impressive," he continued. "Something I never expected. I made a mistake." I smiled faintly, not out of forgiveness, but out of recognition that the tables had turned. "You left me out of Dad's will," I said softly. "You took everything, and now you're realizing it wasn't yours to take." He nodded, silent. "You're strong, Clara. Always have been," he said, almost apologetically. "I know," I replied. "And now I don't need anyone to tell me that. I don't need anyone's approval. Not Dad's, not yours, not even Mom's." The cafe felt smaller somehow, like the air had shifted. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and walked away, leaving Dylan staring after me. Months passed. My firm grew steadily. Clients trusted me. I expanded carefully, without overreaching, without sacrificing integrity. Every contract, every success reminded me that leaving me out of the will didn't stop me. It only forced me to create my own path. One evening, I visited Dad's grave. I hadn't gone since the funeral. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but I didn't shiver. I stood there silently, thinking of all the years I had devoted to him and the business, the sacrifices, the loyalty. "I forgive you," I whispered, more for myself than him. "But I won't excuse what happened." As I turned to leave, I realized something. Inheritance isn't always about money. Sometimes it's about the lessons, the skills, and the resilience we carry forward. Dad's will tried to erase me. Dylan's greed tried to break me. But I was still standing, stronger, wiser, free. They may have taken the house, they may have taken the business, they may have left me with nothing on paper. But I had something they couldn't touch, myself. And with that, I finally understood the truth that Dad never realized. Leaving me out didn't make me weak. It made me unstoppable.